Welcome to the world of terror. I am Draven Nocturnus, and today I will tell you the sinister story of the Patterson Mansion. The Patterson Mansion, imposing and sinister, stands on the hills of a small inland town. For generations, stories of nightly screams and strange lights have fueled local folklore. When young Emma inherits the property from a distant uncle, she finds herself immersed in a nightmare that defies reality. The locked basement holds a secret so horrifying that it threatens not only her sanity, but also the very fabric of the world she knows. The mist snaked between the gnarled trees as Emma Patterson first saw the imposing silhouette of the mansion she had just inherited. The taxi refused to go beyond the rusty gates, leaving her alone with her suitcase and a yellowed envelope containing the key and the will of an uncle she barely knew. As she walked down the uneven stone driveway, Emma felt the weight of countless invisible eyes. The mansion's dark windows seemed to watch her, each holding secrets she couldn't yet imagine. The wind whispered through the dry leaves, bringing with it the distant echo of muffled screams. Or was it just her imagination? The Victorian facade, once majestic, now decayed under decades of neglect. Vines clung to the walls like bony fingers, and the smell of mold and decay permeated the air. Emma hesitated before the front door, her hand trembling slightly. As she inserted the key into the lock, the door's creak echoed through the entrance hall, revealing an interior as oppressive as the exterior. Faded tapestries hung from the walls, depicting scenes of hunts and ancient rituals. A cobweb-covered chandelier swayed gently, though there was no breeze. As her eyes adjusted to the gloom, Emma noticed a solitary figure at the foot of the staircase. An elderly man, bent and with opaque eyes, stared at her with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Miss Patterson, I presume?" His hoarse voice broke the silence. "I am Jeremiah, the caretaker. We were expecting your arrival." Emma frowned. "We were expecting—" An enigmatic smile crossed Jeremiah's lips. "The house, miss. The house always knows." Before Emma could question the strange comment, a dull thud echoed from the depths of the mansion, making her jump. Jeremiah remained impassive. "Ah, yes," he murmured almost to himself. "The basement is restless tonight." Emma felt a shiver run down her spine. Something told her that her uncle's inheritance was much more than just a simple property. In Patterson Mansion, every shadow hid a secret, and she was about to unearth horrors beyond her comprehension. As she followed Jeremiah inside, Emma couldn't help but feel she was taking the first steps toward a nightmare from which she might never wake. The floorboards creaked with every step Emma took through the dark corridors of Patterson Mansion. Jeremiah had disappeared as silently as he had appeared, leaving her alone to discover the secrets hidden in every corner. The faint light filtering through the dusty windows barely illuminated her path. Emma ran her fingers over the surface of an old dresser, leaving a trail in the thick layer of dust. Silver-framed photographs watched her, the pale and severe faces of long-dead ancestors. Entering the library, the smell of musty books and old leather enveloped her. Shelves stretched to the ceiling, filled with tomes whose titles she could barely decipher in the dim light. One in particular caught her attention: Rituals and Invocations of the Pattersons. When she tried to pull it out, however, she found it firmly stuck to the shelf, as if it didn't want to reveal its secrets. A sudden noise made her turn abruptly. For a moment she was sure she saw a shadow move in the corner of the room. But when she blinked, there was nothing there but a worn-out armchair. "Just imagination," she murmured to herself, though without much conviction. Continuing her exploration, Emma reached a particularly narrow corridor. The walls seemed to close in around her, and she could have sworn the eyes in the portraits were following her. At the end of the corridor, a half-open door revealed an abandoned child's room. With her heart racing, she entered. An old crib occupied the center of the room, a mobile of stars and moons hanging above it, spinning slowly despite the absence of wind. In the corner, a porcelain doll stared at her with glassy eyes, a painted smile frozen on its cracked face. Emma approached the doll, an inexplicable sense of dread growing in her chest. When her fingers touched the doll's cold face, a whisper echoed through the room. "She comes. She always comes back." She recoiled, her heart almost leaping out of her throat. The whisper repeated, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Emma ran out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Panting, she leaned against the corridor wall. It was then that she noticed. All the doors in the corridor were now closed except one. At the end of the corridor, a door she hadn't seen before was wide open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. Emma knew she should flee, leave that cursed house behind. But something pulled her towards that darkness. With hesitant steps, she approached the open door, feeling the cold air rising from the basement caress her face like icy fingers. As she stared into the abyss that opened at her feet, Emma had the terrible certainty that whether she wanted to or not, she was about to uncover the macabre secret of Patterson Mansion. Emma descended the first steps cautiously, her heart hammering in her chest. The wooden staircase groaned under her feet, as if protesting her intrusion. As she advanced, the darkness swallowed her, turning each step into a journey into the unknown. At the bottom of the stairs, she groped for a light switch on the wall. Her fingers found something slimy, and she recoiled, suppressing a scream. Finally, she located the switch and flipped it. A single bulb flickered reluctantly, casting dancing shadows on the damp stone walls. There, in the center of the basement, was a heavy oak door reinforced with iron bands, thick chains wrapped around it, secured by a massive padlock that looked too old to have been made in this century. Emma approached, hypnotized by the sight. The chains tinkled softly, as if responding to her presence. "What do you hide?" she murmured, reaching out to touch the padlock. The moment her fingers brushed the cold metal, a sharp scream echoed from behind the door, making her jump back. The scream turned into a low, guttural moan, a voice that didn't sound human. "Free us," the voice whispered, the sound infiltrating her mind like poisonous fog. Emma backed away, tripping over her own feet. The bulb flickered violently, plunging the basement into darkness for seconds that felt like an eternity. When the light returned, she swore that she saw a shadow move under the door's crack. Determined to open the basement, Emma searched the area for something to break the padlock. She found a rusty crowbar in a corner and, with trembling hands, tried to force the lock. The metal groaned in protest but didn't give way. As she struggled with the lock, strange sounds filled the air around her. Whispers in an unknown language, distorted children's laughter, the dragging of invisible chains. The air grew heavy, laden with a putrid smell of decay. Suddenly, the crowbar slipped, cutting her hand. A drop of blood fell on the padlock, which emitted a momentary red glow. Emma recoiled in horror as the blood seemed to be absorbed by the metal. The padlock vibrated, the chains clattered like living snakes. For a moment, Emma thought she would finally be able to open the door. But then, as quickly as it began, it stopped. The padlock remained intact, mocking her attempts. Exhausted and scared, Emma collapsed on the cold basement floor. It was then that she noticed something engraved at the base of the door, almost erased by time. Blood opens, blood closes. Only the chosen one can break the seal. As she contemplated these enigmatic words, Emma felt a presence behind her. Turning slowly, she saw Jeremiah standing at the foot of the stairs, his face an indecipherable mask. "I see you found the heart of the house, Miss Patterson," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally in the confined space. "But remember, Some secrets should remain buried for now. With these words, Jeremiah turned and climbed the stairs, leaving Emma alone with her unanswered questions and a growing fear of what might be locked behind that forbidden door. After the disturbing encounter in the basement, Emma could barely sleep. When she finally fell into a restless sleep, she was dragged into a vivid and terrifying nightmare. She found herself back in the basement, but now the walls pulsed as if alive. The forbidden door was open, revealing an abyss of pulsating darkness. From the void, hooded figures emerged, chanting in an ancient and forgotten language. In the center of the circle formed by the figures was a stone altar stained red. On it, a human form writhed in agony. Emma tried to scream, but no sound came out. She watched helplessly as the figures raised gleaming daggers. "The blood of the Pattersons feeds the Ancient One," a voice reverberated in her mind. "The Pact must be upheld." Emma woke up screaming, her sheet soaked with sweat. The morning light filtered through the curtains but brought no comfort. As she stood up, trembling, she noticed dark finger marks on the bedroom mirror, as if someone, or something, had tried to come out of it. Throughout the day, the line between reality and nightmare began to blur. Emma saw shadows in the corners of her vision, always disappearing when she tried to focus on them. The mansion's corridors seemed to stretch infinitely, changing configuration when she wasn't looking. In the library, the books whispered inaudible secrets. Emma picked up a random volume and opened it, only to find pages covered in strange symbols that seemed to move under her gaze. During dinner, alone in the enormous dining room, Emma swore her reflection in the ornate mirror moved differently, with a sinister delay. When she blinked, she saw for an instant an older, tormented version of herself, eyes devoid of any humanity. Night fell, bringing a new wave of terror. Shadows danced on the walls, forming scenes of macabre rituals. The sound of footsteps echoed through the empty corridors, always approaching but never arriving. In a moment of desperation, Emma ran to her bedroom, locking the door behind her, but the security was illusory. In the oppressive silence, she heard a voice. Her own voice, but distorted and aged. "You can't escape the legacy, Emma. Blood calls to blood. The basement awaits." Turning slowly, she saw a nebulous figure in the mirror. It wasn't her reflection, but the image of an elderly woman, eyes shining with terrible knowledge. Who are you?" Emma stammered. The figure smiled, a smile full of too many sharp teeth to be human. "I am you, dear. I am what you will become, what we all become in the end." The image dissolved into a dark mist that seemed to come out of the mirror, enveloping Emma. She felt a penetrating cold in her bones and a sense that something ancient and malevolent was trying to possess her. Fighting panic, Emma managed to turn on the lamp. The light drove the shadows away, but the fear remained. She knew she could no longer deny the supernatural reality surrounding her. Patterson Mansion held terrible secrets, and something in the basement was calling to her. Emma realized she would have to face the horror head-on if she wanted to survive and maintain her sanity. With trembling hands, she picked up her late uncle's diary from the bedside table. If there were answers to be found, they would be there. Emma began to read, knowing each page would take her deeper into the nightmare that had become her inheritance. With eyes burning from exhaustion and fear, Emma frantically flipped through her uncle's diary. The yellowed pages were covered in erratic handwriting, sometimes almost illegible, as if written by trembling hands. October 10th. The call is getting stronger. I can hear them whispering through the walls. God forgive me for what I did. For what we all did. Emma swallowed hard, turning the pages with trembling fingers. Grotesque drawings of impossible creatures filled the margins, their eyes seeming to follow her. November 15th. The key. The key is the only way to contain this. But the price. Oh, the price is too high. Suddenly, a piece of paper fell from the diary. Emma picked it up, unfolding it carefully. It was a crude map of the mansion, with an X marked in a location she didn't recognize. Determined, Emma began her search. Every room in the mansion seemed to conspire against her. Doors that were once open were now locked. Corridors ended in solid walls, where passages once existed. The ticking of the numerous clocks in the house grew louder, as if the mansion itself were counting the seconds of an invisible deadline. Finally, Emma reached a small abandoned chapel at the back of the property. The smell of rancid incense and decay filled the air. On the altar, a statue of the Virgin Mary watched her with empty eyes, following the map. Emma approached the statue. With trembling hands, she turned the head of the Virgin. A click echoed through the chapel, and the altar slid aside, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. Emma hesitated for a moment, fear threatening to paralyze her. But the distant whisper coming from the depths urged her forward. Emma, come to us. Descending the slippery steps, she reached a small chamber. In the center, on a stone pedestal, rested an ornate box. Intricate carvings covered its surface, depicting scenes of ancient rituals and creatures from the depths. With her heart pounding, Emma opened the box. Inside, nestled in red velvet, was an ancient-looking key. Its dark metal seemed to absorb the light, and strange symbols were engraved on its surface. The moment her fingers touched the key, a wave of visions hit her. Generations of Pattersons performing dark rituals in the basement, shadowy creatures whispering promises of power, unspeakable sacrifices to keep something terrible imprisoned. Emma staggered, almost dropping the key. She understood then that it was not just a key to the basement, but to something much older and more dangerous. A sharp scream echoed through the mansion, followed by the sound of something heavy being dragged. Emma froze, realizing the sound came from the direction of the basement. "Time is up, Miss Patterson." Jeremiah's voice sounded behind her, making her turn abruptly. The old caretaker stood at the chamber entrance, his eyes shining with dark knowledge. "They are waking. You must make your choice now." Emma clutched the key in her hand, feeling its weight, not just physical, but the weight of generations of secrets and horrors. "What choice?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jeremiah smiled, a smile devoid of any joy. "Open the basement and face what lies within, or leave it sealed and accept the consequences. The Patterson legacy is yours now, Emma, and with it, the burden of maintaining the balance between our world and what lies beyond." Another scream echoed, closer this time. Emma knew her decision could no longer be delayed. With the key in hand and a heavy heart, she prepared to face whatever awaited her in the forbidden basement of Patterson Mansion. The air grew denser with each step Emma took towards the basement. The key in her hand pulsed with unnatural heat, as if it were alive and eager. Jeremiah followed silently, his presence a constant reminder of the weight of the choice she was about to make. Standing before the locked door, Emma hesitated. The symbols carved into the wood seemed to writhe and change, forming agonized faces that silently pleaded. With a trembling sigh, she inserted the key into the lock. The mechanism turned with a screech that echoed like a cry of pain. The door opened slowly, revealing darkness so deep it seemed to swallow the light. "There is no turning back after this point, Miss Patterson," Jeremiah murmured. "Whatever you see, remember, horror is just the beginning." Emma swallowed hard and took the first step into the basement. The smell of decay and something older, something that didn't belong to this world, invaded her senses. The darkness enveloped her like a sticky shroud, and she had to fight the urge to retreat. As her eyes adjusted, shapes began to materialize in the gloom. A black stone altar occupied the center of the basement, stained with what Emma prayed was not blood. Around it, black candles spontaneously lit up, casting dancing shadows on walls covered in arcane symbols. A sudden movement caught her attention. In the shadows beyond the altar, something writhed. Emma approached, her heart threatening to explode in her chest. It was a mass of pulsating flesh and tentacles, partially fused to the basement wall. Eyes of all colors and sizes opened and closed randomly on its surface. Mouths filled with sharp teeth appeared and disappeared, murmuring in long-forgotten tongues. What is this?" Emma stammered, her brain struggling to process the horror before her. Jeremiah responded, his voice strangely calm. "This, Miss Patterson, is your family's legacy, the entity your ancestors summoned centuries ago, promising power and knowledge beyond human comprehension." The mass stirred, and a tentacle extended towards Emma. She recoiled, but not fast enough. The tentacle touched her forehead, and an explosion of images invaded her mind. She saw generations of Pattersons performing bloody rituals, feeding the creature with sacrifices. She saw the forbidden knowledge they obtained in return, secrets of the universe no mortal should know. And she saw the terrible price they paid for that knowledge, their souls, their sanity, their humanity. Emma fell to her knees, panting and nauseous. The reality of her family's legacy hit her with full force. "The pact must be upheld," Jeremiah said, his voice now mixed with older, more terrible ones. "The sacrifice must be made, or the barrier between worlds will break." The mass of flesh pulsed, and Emma felt its call. Part of her wanted to give in, to embrace the horror and power it promised. Another part screamed to flee, to seal this evil forever. With trembling legs, Emma stood. She was a Patterson, yes, but she was also herself. And now, before the profane altar and the ancient entity, she would have to make her choice. The fate of Patterson Mansion, and perhaps the world, depended on her decision. Emma took a deep breath, preparing to face the macabre legacy of her family and the consequences of her choice. The air in the basement grew even denser, laden with the weight of centuries of secrets and horrors. Emma stared at the pulsating mass of flesh and tentacles, her body trembling with the magnitude of the choice before her. Jeremiah stepped forward, his figure now seeming to merge with the basement shadows. His voice echoed unnaturally, as if several voices spoke in unison. "The Patterson Pact is simple but relentless. Each generation must sacrifice one to keep the entity contained. In return, knowledge and power beyond human comprehension are granted to the family." Emma felt bile rise in her throat. "And if I refuse?" A guttural laugh emanated from the tentacular mass. Jeremiah, or what was left of him, replied, "Then the barrier breaks. What lies beyond invades our world, and the horror you see here will be but a drop in the ocean of chaos that will follow." Images flooded Emma's mind again. Cities in flames, impossible creatures roaming the streets, reality unraveling at the seams. The price of refusal was too high, but the price of acceptance. Emma saw her ancestors one by one, being consumed by the entity, their essences, their souls, becoming part of that horrendous mass, eternity in agony, conscious but trapped in an endless nightmare. "There must be another way," Emma murmured, desperate. The mass agitated violently, tentacles whipping the air. "There is no escape," Jeremiah's voice thundered. "The blood of the Pattersons sealed this pact centuries ago. Only blood can uphold or break it." Emma closed her eyes, her heart beating frantically. She thought of her life, the dreams she had before inheriting this cursed mansion. She thought of the generations of Pattersons who came before her, each making this same impossible choice. Then an idea emerged in her mind, a crazy, dangerous idea, but it might be the only way out. What if, she began, her voice gaining strength, I could break the cycle, not by feeding the entity or releasing it, but by destroying it. The ensuing silence was deafening. Then a roar of fury emanated from the tentacular mass, shaking the basement walls. Jeremiah laughed, a joyless sound. Many have tried before. All failed. But Emma saw something in his eyes, a glimmer of hope. Maybe, she said, straightening her shoulders. They didn't have the knowledge I have now. With a swift movement, Emma grabbed the ritual dagger resting on the altar. The cold metal burned in her hand, imbued with the power of countless sacrifices. I am Emma Patterson, she declared, her voice echoing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. And I choose to break this pact, not for my salvation, but for all who will come after me. The tentacular mass lunged at her, but Emma was ready. With the dagger in one hand and the ancestral key in the other, she prepared for the final confrontation. The fate of the Pattersons, the future of the mansion, and possibly the balance between worlds were at stake. Emma knew her choice could cost her life, her soul, or something even worse. But for the first time, since she entered that cursed mansion, she felt something beyond fear. Determination. Whatever the outcome, she would face the horror head-on, determined to end the nightmare once and for all. The air in the basement exploded into chaos. Tentacles whipped through the air, seeking Emma with blind fury. She dodged, her body moving purely on survival instinct. "Fool!" Jeremiah's voice, now completely inhuman, reverberated through the walls. "You cannot destroy what transcends reality itself." Emma ignored the shouts, focusing on the task at hand. With the ritual dagger, she cut her own wrist, letting the blood drip onto the ancestral key. The ancient metal absorbed the red liquid, starting to glow with a supernatural light. The tentacular mass roared with fury and pain. Emma felt the ground tremble beneath her feet, the mansion itself seeming to groan in agony. With a cry of defiance, she plunged the energized key into the entity's pulsating center. An explosion of energy enveloped them, throwing Emma against the wall. Chaotic visions flooded her mind, universes being born and dying, realities intertwining and shattering, the fabric of time itself unraveling. Emma felt as if her body were being torn into 1,000 pieces, her consciousness scattered across infinite dimensions. But amid the chaos, she clung to a single thought, ending the pact. With superhuman effort, she turned the key. The ensuing scream was not of this world. The tentacular mass began to implode, sucking into itself. Jeremiah, or what was left of him, was dragged into the vortex of flesh and horror. "What have you done?" he shouted, his body dissolving into shadows. "You've doomed us all." Emma barely heard him. She struggled to stay conscious, to stay whole as reality shattered around her. The basement began to collapse. Cracks spread across the walls, the ceiling threatening to cave in. Emma crawled towards the exit, each movement agony. Behind her, where the entity once was, there was now only a black hole, sucking everything around it. Emma could feel its pull, trying to drag her back. With a final desperate effort, she threw herself through the basement door, rolling down the stairs. The sound of destruction followed her, the entire mansion seeming to collapse in on itself. Emma ran through the corridors, now unrecognizable. Paintings fell from the walls, the floor opening in impossible chasms. The air was filled with screams. Of the Pattersons of the past, of the mansion itself. She couldn't tell. Finally, she reached the front door. With the last of her strength, Emma threw herself outside, collapsing onto the cold grass of the night. Turning, she watched in horror as Patterson Mansion imploded on itself, as if being sucked into an invisible black hole. In seconds, nothing remained but an empty lot where the imposing structure once stood. Emma lay there panting, her body aching, and her mind in tatters. She had survived, had broken the pact, but at what cost? As the adrenaline subsided, Emma began to notice something different. The world around her seemed slightly out of focus, as if reality hadn't completely settled, and inside her, deep in her mind, she could feel something moving, a whisper, an echo of the horror she had faced. Emma stood up shakily, facing the spot where the mansion once stood. She had won the battle, but a terrible suspicion began to form. Perhaps the war had only just begun. With unsteady steps, she walked away from the ruins of her family's legacy into the night. Whatever the future held, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. 5 years had passed since the night Patterson Mansion disappeared from the face of the earth. Emma Patterson, now with prematurely greying hair and permanent dark circles under her eyes, sat in her small apartment in a distant city, far from any memory of her former home. She looked at her hands, noticing the thin scars running across her wrists, a physical reminder of the ritual she had performed on that fateful night. The scars seemed to pulse lightly, as if they had a life of their own. The apartment around her was Spartan, almost empty. The walls were covered with strange symbols drawn with charcoal, and sometimes with her own blood. Desperate attempts to keep something under control, something she always felt lurking in the shadows of her mind. Emma picked up the newspaper on the table. The headline caught her attention. Waves of unexplained events continue to haunt the country. Her eyes quickly scanned the article, highlighting phrases like paranormal phenomena, mysterious disappearances, and reports of impossible creatures. She tossed the newspaper aside, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. She had broken the pact, destroyed the mansion and the entity, but at what cost? The nightmares never stopped. Every night Emma found herself back in that basement, facing indescribable horrors, and every morning she woke up with the terrible feeling that something had escaped with her, something that now hid in the darkest corners of her mind. Standing up, Emma walked to the window. The world outside seemed normal at first glance, people coming and going, cars passing, life going on, but she knew better. She could see the small inconsistencies, the shadows moving wrong, the reflections not exactly matching what they should. Reality had been damaged that night, and the cracks were spreading. Emma closed her eyes, feeling the familiar pulse in the back of her consciousness. The voice, that voice she feared was her own, whispered, "You did not destroy us, Emma Patterson. You only set us free. Now we are part of you, part of everything." Opening her eyes, Emma stared at her reflection in the window. For a moment she saw something looking back, something ancient, something hungry. She stepped away from the window, her fingers instinctively tracing the protection symbols on her arms. Emma knew her fight hadn't ended that night in the mansion. In fact, maybe it never would. The horror she had faced was no longer confined to a dark basement. Now it was everywhere. In the air she breathed, in the shadows that followed her, and most terrifyingly, inside her. Emma grabbed her coat and left the apartment. As she walked through the city streets, blending into the crowd, she couldn't help but wonder how many others carried secrets like hers. How many others had looked into the eyes of the indescribable and survived to tell the tale. The last Patterson had broken the ancestral pact, but the price of that freedom was a burden she would carry forever. And as the sun set on the horizon, casting long shadows over the city, Emma knew her vigil against the horror was just beginning. The Patterson legacy had ended, but a new and terrible chapter was just beginning, not just for Emma, but for the entire world. The saga of the Pattersons is just a thread in the dark web that permeates our world. In every city, behind respectable facades, families keep ancestral secrets capable of defying reality itself. The horror Emma faced might have been contained, but its echoes reverberate through the fabric of our universe, waiting to be heard by those willing to listen. Stay tuned for the next tale by Draven Nocturnus, where new family curses, demonic pacts, and unimaginable horrors await those brave or foolish enough to uncover them. Remember, sometimes the true terror isn't locked in a forbidden basement, but hidden within ourselves. Until the next night of nightmares, when the shadows grow long and the whispers from beyond find new ears to torment.